we have to let the people know that we're going live. You guys know that I'm going live. You guys knew that I was going live when I posted it on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page. And I got to let the people know on Twitter and all the other social media platforms out there that I am going live. Once again, right now you're tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you for joining me for another edition of the Thomas Take. And this one obviously comes 2 days after UFC 225 took place. UFC 225 took place Saturday night, live on pay-per-view, 7 in the West, 10 in the East. And for those of you that live on the East Coast, you understand my pain when I tell you that being an East Coast MMA fan is not fun. By any stretch of the imagination, it is not fun due to the fact that the pay-per-views last so damn long. The main event with Whittaker and Romero didn't essentially end until about 12:30, 1 o'clock. That was very tough to digest. I have to start off the show, in terms of this being a combat sports show, I have to start off the show by announcing that Deontay Wilder has accepted a heavyweight title fight with Anthony Joshua. That super fight in the sport of boxing will take place this fall. That is huge news out of the sport of boxing. That's a huge super fight. Both Joshua and Wilder are undefeated. Both fighters have won the majority of their fights via knockout. Both are the two biggest names currently in boxing outside of Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. Active, I should say. Floyd's still roaming around the boxing ranks, but I wouldn't deem him to be, an active member of that sport anymore. So, a lot to talk about today in terms of the UFC 225. Let me just post this real quick. I should have posted this before the show. My apologies. And that's what we be doing. That's what we doing. So, as I said, everybody, my name is Ryan Thomas. I am a sports writer and podcast host from Buffalo, New York. You can catch me talking about the Buffalo Bills, the National Football League headlines, MLB and MMA, as well as boxing and NHL. My recap quite yet on the Stanley Cup. There's a lot to digest with that, but even more so, there was a lot to digest with this event, UFC 225, an event in Chicago, Illinois, at the United Center that had two quote-unquote title fights on the card. We had Robert Whittaker defending his UFC middleweight title versus Yoel Romero in a rematch that took place last year. We had Colby Covington taking on Rafael dos Anjos. The winner of that fight would win the UFC interim welterweight title. So essentially cementing themselves as the number one contender. Women's featherweight, Holly Holm versus Megan Anderson. This was the first fight in women's UFC women's featherweight history that was a non-title fight after a year and 4 months, 4 months essentially. That fight was one of interest to me. We'll go down the line of who won and how they won. So in the main event, Robert Whittaker defeated Yoel Romero via split decision. All three judges had it 48-47. One judge had it 48-47 for Whittaker, 48-7 for Whittaker. 5-minute rounds. Very close fight indeed. Colby Covington defeated Rafael dos Anjos via unanimous decision, 49-46, 48-47, and 48-47. One judge gave Colby 4 rounds, while the other two judges gave Colby 3 rounds. Holly Holm, the former women's bantamweight champion, as I mentioned just moments ago, fighting in the women's featherweight division again, post her last fight versus Chris Cyborg. She went 5-minute rounds, the distance with Cyborg, which nobody has ever done. She defeated Megan Anderson 30-27, 30-26, 30-26. A dominant fight for Holly Holm. Tuivasa defeated Andrei Arlovsky via unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, and 29-28 unanimous decision. In the welterweight division, we had Mike Jackson, the 0-1 Mike Jackson, take on the 0-1 CM Punk. That was a unanimous decision, 30-26, 30-26, and 30-26 on all three judges' scorecards. The preliminary card that started on Fox Sports 1 featured a barn burner of a heavyweight fight, a slobber knocker, to take a term from WWE's Jim Ross. Chris De La Rocha versus Rashad Coulter. De La Rocha won that fight via TKO late in the second round. In the featherweight division, Mirsad Bektic defeated via split decision, 29-28, 28-29, and 30-27. I would agree with that third judge on that 30-27. So Claudia Gadelha back in the octagon, taking on Carla Esparza in a fight that I deem to be a very important fight. Excuse me on that. A very important fight in the women's strawweight division. The winner obviously inches himself closer to that title shot versus Rose Namajunas. And Claudia Gadelha won that fight via split decision. Curtis Blades in the main event of the preliminary card defeated Alistair Overeem via TKO in the third round, the middle of the third round, third and final round of that fight. UFC Fight Pass early in the afternoon. There was some fights with some notable names. One of the big stories heading into this pay-per-view was the fact that CM Punk was on the pay-per-view portion of the card, whereas guys like Joseph Benavidez, Rashad Evans, Sergio Pettis, Charles Oliveira, Clay Guida, and even obviously Alistair Overeem and Claudia Gadelha and Carlos Esparza were not on the pay-per-view card. I would have easily put Blades versus Overeem on the pay-per-view over Jackson and CM Punk, but Dana is Dana, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But in the preliminary card on UFC Fight Pass, Dan Ige defeated Mike Santiago versus or via, I should say, TKO in the first round, 50 seconds into the fight. Two UFC veterans at lightweight, Charles Oliveira versus Clay Guida. Oliveira submitted Clay Guida. This was a short notice fight as well for Charles Oliveira, so this was a big win for him. Clay Guida's a name still. He's got some relevance inside that division, inside the UFC. He might not be as good as he once was, but that's what happens with age. Sergio Pettis at flyweight versus Joseph Benavidez won via split decision. I think Pettis inched himself closer to a title shot versus Mighty Mouse with that win. And then in the light heavyweight division, Anthony Smith, the final fight of the prelims, defeated my guy, my hometown boy, guy that I've talked to on several occasions, Rashad Evans, via knee KO. And I want to talk about Rashad for a little bit, okay, just to start off the show. So many people, that have no business deciding when a fighter should hang it up are saying that Rashad should hang it up. I think that there's an outlier to that. Obviously, people really care about Rashad. He's a fan favorite still, although he has lost, I think it's 5 of his last 7 fights or 6 of his last 7 fights, some of which in devastating fashion. They don't want to see him get punished, and suffer, any physical damage. But Rashad Evans felt like he still had something to prove. He felt like he still had something left. He felt like this was a good fight for him. He was controlling Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith had him in like a tie clinch position. Evans had underhooks. He turned Evans, and by turning Evans' head this way, he threw the knee right at his face, and it knocked him down as it would with anyone. Just getting caught in a bad position there. But I'm not going to say that Rashad Evans should retire, because I don't feel like I don't have the gall to do that. To say that Rashad Evans should retire, I don't think is fair. I think that maybe he should have retired a little while ago, to be quite honest. I think he should have retired a little while ago. But I'm not going to say, well, he's washed up, he's this, he's that. I'm not going to kick a man while he's down. And that's the thing. You don't kick a fighter while he's down. Obviously, he thought that he had something to prove, that he had something left, and it didn't go his way. Does that mean he's a bum? No. For Pete's sake, this man was a former UFC light heavyweight champion. He won the Ultimate Fighter at heavyweight. He did things that at the time were really, really big for the sport, and helped bring a new era into the sport of guys that were extremely athletic for his size. For a guy that fought at heavyweight in the Ultimate Fighter to move down to 205 and to win with the athleticism and the speed in which he fought with in his prime, he's a legend, Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. What he did for the UFC light heavyweight division was huge at the time. His rivalry with John Jones was massive. He had a massive rivalry with Quentin Rampage Jackson back in the day as well. He's a trendsetter. He's a tone setter, trailblazer, whatever word you want to use. Rashad Evans is that and much, much more. And more so, he's a very decent human being. I've had the privilege of meeting him on several occasions. Once when I was 17, I was working at a grocery store at the time, oddly enough, and he came through, my aisle or whatever, and it was completely dead. I asked him if he was Rashad Evans, and I knew he was Rashad Evans after we had to check the IDs, and it was like, wow, I'm looking at Rashad Evans' driver's license. That was pretty cool. That's a little story back from my younger days, but I was at 716 last year when the UFC was in Buffalo, and I got to talk to Rashad Evans again. I know his nephew, Otis Arterberry. I went to high school with him back in my days in Lockport. But, yeah, so great guy. I'm not going to kick the guy while he's down. He's been an ultra ambassador for the sport, and he's done a lot of great things. He's done a lot of great coaching. He's coached a lot of great fighters. And I'm honored to have watched his career from day one till now. If this is the end for Rashad Evans, God bless you, man. You had a great career, and you did a lot of honorable things inside that UFC octagon. He came a long way from being that showboating fighter that Matt Hughes did not want on his Ultimate Fighter team. He's done a lot of amazing things, and he's a high-class individual. So I tip my cap without wearing one to Rashad Evans. As far as a fight on the card that really rattled some of the perception of the fans was Pettis versus Benavidez. Very close fight indeed. And it's one that the flyweight division produces close fights due to the fact that these guys don't really have the finishing power to knock one of their opponent out. It's often a cat and mouse game of who's faster, who can beat who to the punch. When there is a flash knockout in a flyweight division, it is very rare. And Sergio Pettis and Joseph Benavidez had a lot to lose heading into this fight, so they wanted to play chess while the other was playing checkers, and it turned out that both of them were playing chess during that fight. So I think, personally, when there's a fight that's a split decision and it's so close, if it hasn't been done once, it should be done again. If it hasn't been done once already, it should be done again. I would personally like to see Sergio Pettis and Joseph Benavidez fight again. Will that happen? Maybe not. But there is light at the end of the tunnel for that due to the fact that the UFC announced during the pay-per-view that Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, the champion at 125 pounds, will be taking on Henry Cejudo in a rematch for the UFC flyweight title in August. So we could see Sergio Pettis and Joseph Benavidez do it again. I think that that's necessary. I think that's what's needed. I think that's what is important for both of their careers. If there's a lot of fans wondering whether or not these guys should fight again or who these guys should fight, I think that means that they should fight again. So let me just take a swig of my Pepsi here, and I'm not sponsored by Pepsi. So to say the least, me personally, I think Pettis versus Benavidez should take place again. I'd like to see that fight happen once again. Moving on from those two fights, Chris De La Rocha, who reminded me of a kid named Colton LaRoche that I went to high school with. And it was funny because I realized his name was De La Rocha. Chris De La Rocha versus Rashad Coulter was a slobber knocker. And for a while, like as the fight started, was like, oh my God, this fight is going to be terrible. These guys have no athleticism. They have no speed. They're raw power. It's just going to be like a bar brawling fight. And it showed as it went on that it was a little technical. These guys did trade good shots with each other, and they used their power. They used their angles, and it was a very entertaining fight. I think that was one of the more entertaining fights of the night, especially on the prelim side of things. I did feel like Rashad Coulter had no shot at getting up from his back in that fight due to the size of De La Rocha and the size of Coulter. Imagine being that big, imagine being that big on your back and having someone that big on top of you. It was not going to happen. He would have been laying there until Thanksgiving, maybe even Christmas. It was not ending by any stretch of the imagination until someone got knocked out, and that guy that got knocked out was the one that was on his back in Coulter. Another fight that really peeved me as the card went on was the Ricardo Lamas Mirsad Bektic fight, which was a fight that took place right after that on the preliminary card. I thought Lamas has always been a guy that is so gun shy in there, is not willing to trade, as much as he used to, I should say. Mirsad Bektic was going to defend the takedown. He trains with GSP at TriStar Gym, for Pete's sake. So Lamas trying to shoot in for that takedown was very, very questionable in terms of his strategy. When a fighter initiates a takedown and the other guy defends the takedown, it completely nullifies everything and offsets everything to me. And the fact that Lamas continued to try for the takedown was ridiculous. I thought it was one of the dumbest strategies of the night from all the combatants on Saturday night. I thought Lamas should have forced Bektic to trade. His best chance to win the fight was to knock him out rather than trying to fight Bektic at his own game. It was very, very questionable to me, and there's a reason why Lamas's career has kind of taken a downslide. It's due to the fact that the strategies that he's implemented in his last few fights are highly, highly debatable, highly, highly questionable, and I don't know what to say about his career. He went from being a top contender fighting Jose Aldo to really a prelim guy. And that's a shame. His performance versus Jose Aldo was really where it all started, where he was gun shy, where he didn't want to pull the trigger, where he just seemed like he was just there to be there rather than being there to win the fight. And it's tough for practice. It's easy to practice. It's tough to compete the way that you practiced. I know that firsthand as an athlete, preparing for a wrestling match, preparing for a baseball game. There could have been pitches that I hit in practice that I couldn't hit in games. There could be wrestling moves that I was able to do in practice, but when I got on the mat, it just didn't happen. And I think that's what we're seeing a little bit with Ricardo Lamas. He's not implementing what he practiced very, very well in his gym, but out on the mat, out on the octagon, it's just not. It's not transferring. It's not going that extra mile, and that is why we've seen the downslide for Ricardo Lamas in his career. Now, when I recap Claudia Gadelha versus Carlos Esparza, before I do that, I really need to talk about another topic that happened with Esparza and Gadelha. This has been a fight that had been brewing for a long time. Both of these fighters had a beef, a serious beef, that they really do not like each other at all. That it is not fake. It is not phony. It's not just for entertainment. They really do not like each other, to say the least. And when this fight happened and it was signed, sealed, and delivered, finally, I thought, finally, this is going to happen. This is going to take place. It's going to be a good fight. It's going to be a fight that is very important for both fighters. As Gadelha lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk, as Esparza lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk, but beat Rose Namajunas for the strawweight title back in the day. She was the first UFC women's strawweight title holder back in 2013, 2014, if I've got that right. And both fighters were letting it all out. They were slinging leather. They were trying to get the takedown. They were trying to finish each other on the ground. Carlos Esparza said today on Ariel Helwani's last episode of the MMA Hour that Claudia was greased. She was greased. She had Vaseline all over her body. Now, that's a very serious claim, very serious accusation, which we haven't heard that in a while in the MMA circles, that someone could be greasing, that someone could do that to cheat, to try to get a leg up on an opponent. And Carlos Esparza said this about Claudia Gadelha, and that's a big, big deal. I think that the UFC really needs to review that, really needs to look into the film and see if that is what took place. Because if it is, that win with Claudia Gadelha should be removed from her record, should be ruled a no contest, which would then mean, much like Pettis versus Benavidez, outside the fact that Pettis and Benavidez fought to a split decision, there wasn't this Greasegate controversy. I think Claudia Gadelha, if she is found guilty of this, should have the win removed from her record. And I'm going to see these ladies fight as soon as possible. Claudia Gadelha, damage-wise, was much more damaged than Carlos Esparza. I thought Gadelha had taken a lot of shots. And when the decision was read, I honestly thought that Carlos Esparza won the fight. You go to the judges' scorecards as we look here on my notes here. Claudia Gadelha won via split decision 29-28. 28-29 and 29-28. Two judges gave her 2 rounds, where I would have either said it was a Esparza or a draw. And this is something that blows my mind about the sport of MMA. As much as MMA has grown in popularity, as much as it has changed for the better in certain ways, there are some ways where it has gotten so much worse. And one constant in being bad back in the day till now is the judging. If the judging in mixed martial arts continues at the rate in which it is in right now, trending towards this direction, mixed martial arts will be just like boxing. It'll be obsolete. It'll be dead in the water. People will not want to donate or contribute, I should say, their $64.99 for pay-per-view, where the judges do not know the rules and regulations of the sport. They do not understand what is actually taking place in there. And I've been a avid viewer, fan, whatever you want to call it. I've written for the sport for almost 5 years now, and I competed in wrestling. So when they rule that a takedown is a point, like they do their scorecards and they say, well, let's just say, for example, for hypothetical reasons, Carlos Esparza gets a takedown on Claudia Gadelha. That's a half point in their minds. Check, she gets the takedown. She earned that takedown. Takedown should be scored. It should be scored, but if that said fighter that initiated the takedown, that gets the takedown, doesn't do anything with it, such as getting Gadelha in a finishing position, such as ground and pound, I don't really want to look at that. That's where I want to look at the exchanges. That's where I want to look at activity, octagon control, as they famously say. And I think that some of the scoring points on a judge's scorecard are being overlooked, or they're not fully understood. It is not corrupt. That is boxing. Boxing judges are corrupt. MMA judges are incompetent. They do not understand what this sport actually means. The crowd reacts to the fights better than they used to. That I know, which means to me that the crowd reacting in certain ways is more knowledgeable. The crowd is more knowledgeable than the fighter, than the judges. And I know firsthand, the names of some of the judges, some of the decisions that have been made the last few years, some of the fights that just make no damn sense in terms of the final scoring decision. Those judges are boxing judges. They are not MMA judges. When are we going to get to a point in the sport where judges that are judging MMA are MMA judges rather than employees of the Nevada State Athletic Commission, of the New York State Athletic Commission, that have judged boxing fights? They do not understand the sport, because this sport is so much more complex and unique in comparison to boxing. There is much, much more to score. There is much, much more to look at. Even if a fighter has their back against the cage and they are locked in a body lock, but they're punching the other fighter in the head while the other fighter is holding them against the cage. To me, that fighter that's punching the fighter in the head with his back against the cage is winning because they are actually doing something. They're actually trying to connect. But to the UFC judges / boxing judges that are trying to understand mixed martial arts or trying to get an extra paycheck, which is what it really is, it's a damn joke. And there's no doubt about that. I am so sick of it as a fan. I've been a fan of this sport since the beginning, and it has only gotten worse, where you would think as time has evolved, the crowd has learned to understand the sport faster than the judges that are judging the sport, which is obviously because of the fact that these judges that are judging MMA are not MMA judges. They are boxing judges or employees of the commissions in which the event takes place. State employees of the commission and where the event takes place, whether it's Nevada, whether it's Illinois, whether it's Texas, you name it. They're not actual MMA judges, and it is killing this sport. It's ruining fighters' records. It is damning to the sport, and it is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. It's one of those things that it only can get worse before it gets better. It's going to take a true robbery that will outrage the entire mixed martial arts world in a massive, massive fight in order for it to change. Dana says he has no pull with the commissions, that he can't change the judges. He can't pick his own judges. That's the first priority for me. Rather than holding an event in Russia, you can hold as many events globally. You can be as successful as the UFC is. Until there are competent judges scoring the fights in this sport, this is not an official sport. We are demeaning the sport. This is a sport. This is a great sport. This is a highly evolved sport. This sport has grown leaps and bounds over the years. But the one constant in the prior gladiator age of the UFC is the fact that the judges are so damn bad that it is infuriating to me as a fan. You have to do better. You have to do better. And this card specifically showed that, with split decisions with Pettis and Benavidez, with split decisions with Bektik and Lamas, with split decisions with Gadelha and Esparza. That's only on the prelim Fight Pass card. Doesn't get much better from here, people. Does not get much better from here. So let's move on and really revisit that point. Welterweight Mike Jackson defeated CM Punk in one of the most amateur UFC fights of all time. The most amateur UFC fight of all time. You have a fighter 0-1 taking on a fighter 0-1. This has never happened in the UFC before. There was a reason for it, and it damn well, for Pete's sake, should never happen again. I never want to see CM Punk in an octagon that has the letters U, F, and C on it. I never want to see Mike Jackson in a UFC octagon ever again. These fighters are amateurs. These are not fighters. These are contestants. That's it. That's it. Jackson and CM Punk, where do I start with how bad this fight was? And all respect to these guys for getting in there. I have to preface my statement by saying that it's almost like when you see a crime show and a guy gets arrested and they say you have a right to an attorney, you know, blah, 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 the whole spiel. I have to say Mike Jackson versus CM Punk, they had the cojones to get in there and swap punches. Everybody has to say that about these fighters when they decide to get in there, or people that want to be fighters, or people that think they can be fighters in the UFC. Both of these guys lost to Mickey Gall embarrassingly. So the UFC said, well, CM Punk's got one more shot to get a win in the UFC. He's got to fight the guy that Mickey Gall beat, being that he lost to Mickey Gall. Makes perfect sense. Matchmaking-wise, this was the easiest fight to put together, the easiest matchmaking that could ever take place, with two guys that are 0-1 that both lost to the same guy. That's fine. Putting this fight on a pay-per-view is a joke, and there's no two ways about it. CM Punk, God bless you. I hate to do this, But for a guy that fought so terribly versus Mickey Gall, the fight lasted about 2 minutes, 2.5, 2 minutes and 40 seconds, if I'm remembering right. 2 years ago, 2 years later, he looked worse. And the fight lasted longer because he was with a more amateur opponent, an opponent that wanted his 15 minutes of fame verbatim. I kept CM Punk in there. I dragged him into the third round so I could get more octagon time. And I watched the post-fight press conference, as I always do. Watch the post-fight press conference, as I always do. And Dana White came out and said, Mike Jackson's a showboater. I don't want him in the UFC. He shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. The only person that Dana White has to blame for Mike Jackson showboating versus CM Punk is Dana White. You copy that? The only person that Dana White has to blame for this fight turning out the way that it did is Dana White. The whole CM Punk experiment that started 4 years ago was a joke when it was announced. It was a joke when the first fight took place. It was a joke when the second fight took place. Phil Brooks, God love you. You're tough. But there's a line in a boxing movie. You show me a guy with heart, I'll show you a guy that's willing to take a beating. That was CM Punk. That was CM Punk. You show me a guy with heart, I'll show you a guy that's willing to take a beating. Talk about all the heart, all the corny Disney movie stuff that we can talk about on here. That he had heart, that he knew he was probably going to get beat, but he went in there trying to prove a point that you can live your dreams and all that corny stuff. No, if this is a sport, and Dana White and company want people to take this sport seriously, CM Punk just set that notion back by a lot. By a lot. And I think he's a good guy. I think his message is positive. I think he does a lot for fans. I've always been a fan of his, in his WWE career. But I can only speak to what I know. I was humbled in my own way, and I'm not going to go through, this like I'm a legend of any sort, but CM Punk at the ripe age of 37, 38, trying to compete in the premier mixed martial arts organization in the world versus the most amateur fighter that you could possibly find in the UFC is comparable to when I tried out for the wrestling team in high school my senior year. My first few matches did not go so well for me. I got thrown around like a rag doll. I got cross-faced, I got cut, I got bruised. But that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to give it a shot. And as it went on, I got better and things like that. But obviously, I'm not comparing MMA to wrestling, but it's similar in the fact that CM Punk wanted to try to do something that nobody thought he could do. He did it. He failed. I wanted to do something that I wanted to try something different. I failed for a little while. I broke about even in the end for my limited experience. For what I did okay. I did okay. But if me right now tried to get in an MMA octagon, the only base I would have is my scholastic wrestling background. And that is it. CM Punk had some grappling experience, some athleticism, and frankly, he did train at a great gym with great trainers, with great training partners, but you cannot learn a lifetime in 4 years. You cannot learn a sport that is so well-versed in 4 years. You can't do it. And CM Punk proved that. So I really hope this is the last time the UFC takes someone from another organization and believes that he could come in there and actually win a fight versus anyone, versus any random Joe Schmo. Mickey Gall is not that. Mike Jackson is that. And was Mike Jackson's showboating ridiculous? 100%. 100%. It was annoying. He could have finished the fight on several occasions, but the UFC saying that they thought that this fight didn't go the way that they wanted it to as far as entertainment, that it dragged out due to Mike Jackson not wanting to finish the fight, that is their own fault for putting this stupid fight together in the first place. Should have never happened. And it was a abysmal fight. Abysmal. Terrible, whatever word you want to use. It was one of the worst 15 minutes I've ever watched in my life as a viewer and as a writer for mixed martial arts. It showed how amateur they were when that fight was all said and done, and then the next fight on the card was Tai Tuivasa and Andrei Arlovski, a heavyweight fight. Guys that are 250 pounds, had more athleticism than Mike Jackson and CM Punk, and that's because those are actual professional mixed martial artists, where Mike Jackson and CM Punk are not. Mike Jackson is probably the worst fighter to ever fight in UFC, and what would that make CM Punk? I honestly don't know what more to say about this other than the fact that I was embarrassed to watch it. I was embarrassed while watching it. I was embarrassed for CM Punk. I'm not trying to kick the guy while he's down. I understand. I said that about Rashad Evans, but Rashad Evans is an actual professional mixed martial artist that had a 10, 13-year career, where CM Punk is a guy that it's almost a disgrace that they let this guy fight in the premier mixed martial arts organization just because he's buddies with Dana White. Who's next? Is Trump next? Is Anthony Kiedis next? Is the singer from Rage Against the Machine next? Who's next? If Dana White's buddies are going to get auditions in the UFC, who's next? Mark Wahlberg? Come on. Really? And, I've gotten a lot of emails on the Thomas Take mailbag saying, what did you think about CM Punk? I thought this was a joke from the start. Knowing the athletes, knowing the level of some of the greatest fighters that have ever competed in the sport, it is a stain on the sport. It's like someone in the UFC joining the WWE. It's a joke. It's a joke doing that. There was a reason why Chael Sonnen turned down that offer, because it's a joke. Vice versa, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. LeVar Ball said it to Kristen Leahy, and it was so unprofessional and grody when he said it. But in that circumstance, it wasn't applied right at all. But in this case, CM Punk needed to stay in his lane. And if the WWE doesn't want him back, do something else. Do something else. Commentate wrestling. Do anything. He's a likable guy, very nice guy, but that fight was as ridiculous as CM Punk's hair during the fight. He'd get punched, his hair would explode. He'd get punched this way, his hair would explode that way. I mean, I think this fight summed up in one. CM Punk's fighting career summed up in one picture will be this. Look at that. What is that? Look at that hair flying from those punches. He had no business being in the UFC. And I say that with love. I really mean it, Phil. Tai Tuivasa versus Andrei Arlovski, a straight-up robbery. There was no way in hell that Tai Tuivasa won that fight. I don't care what anyone says. The decision was unanimous. Unanimous decision for Tai Tuivasa, the guy that drinks out of shoes. What the hell? What have we come to in the sport with, quote unquote, the new generation? What is going on? Guys drinking out of a shoe or out of a boot? Andrei Arlovski, a pro's pro, true veteran of the game, has evolved. People are saying he's devolved. No, he has evolved. A guy that knows that he can't take a punch as good as he used to, but is still finding ways to win fights. It's a guy that's evolved, not devolved. It's a guy that's evolved. And he implemented a great in and out game, landing crisp jab, straight combinations every which way, in every which round, and it still wasn't good enough. Tai Tuivasa didn't do anything in my eyes to win that fight. It's just a classic case of judges that do not know what they are watching. They do not understand the sport of mixed martial arts. They don't get it. I can't talk more about that because it will pop a vein in my neck. I can't do it. Holly Holm, let's get on the bright side here. One of the biggest winners of the night, by far, my first biggest winner of the night was Holly Holm, the former UFC women's bantamweight champion. She took on the long, lanky giant. Compared to her, which Holly Holm is a jacked woman. She is shredded. She's been to Shred City more than once. Megan Anderson has, I don't know, she is a specimen as well. Bigger than Holly Holm, longer, lankier. Holly Holm was the smaller fighter in this fight, and Holly Holm dominated Megan Anderson with her wrestling. It was one of the most impressive performances of her career, outside of the fact that she lasted 25 minutes with Cyborg, outside of the fact that she punted Ronda Rousey's head into the first row. Outside of all that, she learned from her mistakes. And her mistake in the Miesha Tate fight was that she tried to shrug her off, and it actually led Miesha Tate's momentum to a tighter clinch, because Miesha just hanged on for dear life. Holly implemented a fantastic wrestling takedown offense and really showed that she had great ground and pound. She has evolved in this sport, and I really think it's only a matter of time that she fights for the title at either weight class once again. Once again. And good for her. She's one of the greatest. I think she's the greatest female fighter ever outside of Cyborg. I really do. Next up on the docket, my boy, the Nerd Bash 2018 has officially come to fruition. Now that Colby Covington is the UFC interim welterweight champion. I want to start off by saying that, yes, I do think from time to time that Colby Covington's trash talk is a little out there, that it's a little corny, that it's a little forced, that it's a little scripted, shall I say. The gimmick is a gimmick for a reason. It's called a gimmick for a reason because it is one. He's embracing the inner heel. He's trying to get more pay-per-view buys. He's trying to get more high-profile fights. And guess what? It worked and then some. It worked and then some. His performance versus Damian Maia was eye-opening. Nobody has ever fought Damian Maia the way that Colby Covington did. Nobody has ever beaten Damian Maia the way that Colby Covington did. Not even the current UFC welterweight champion, Tyron Woodley. Whereas when Woodley fought Maia, it was one of the lowest striking output fights of all time in UFC history. Colby Covington put out one of the highest striking outputs in UFC history against Maia, one fight later in Maia's career. That was the next step for him to get this interim title shot. Many MMA fans wondered why Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was not getting this fight. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson had some slip-ups, and he had a very, I don't want to say unimpressive, but a very vanilla dominant performance versus Jorge Masvidal. And let's just call a spade, call it what it is, and say that Colby Covington is a hallmark of the current UFC, the entertainment era of MMA. He is now a part of that, whether people like it or not. He's been a part of it, but now he's officially a part of it now that he has that interim welterweight title, cinching himself a fight with the current champion, Tyron Woodley. Now, when I did my UFC pick'em, I did that on the audio side of things. I talked about how Covington has what it takes to win this fight. Whether I think he does or doesn't is another story. I thought RDA was coming off a real impressive win over Saffiedine, over Magny, and over Lawler. Nobody has ever beaten Robbie Lawler like that. Granted, Lawler tore his knee in that fight, but nobody had ever beaten Robbie Lawler like that before or since, being that he hasn't fought since. RDA put him out for a long time. And Robbie Lawler is one of the toughest SOBs that's ever fought, ever, in any sport. So that was a lot. You know, the Robbie Lawler fight, RDA. I think that I'm a massive fan of Robbie Lawler. So when RDA won the fight the way that he did, it kind of propped him up to me, and said, well, he's a former lightweight champ. He's looked really good at 170. I thought Colby had what it took to win. I thought his game plan was going to be push him against the fence, grind him into the ground, and try to stay alive, try not to get hit. And that style is that of another fighter from Oregon, as is Colby Covington. But that style of grinding a guy against the fence, going right after him, high pressure, high volumes of takedown attempts. Does that remind you of another guy from Oregon? The American gangster, Chael Sonnen himself, former UFC middleweight contender, former UFC light heavyweight contender, current Bellator heavyweight contender, the man, the myth, the legend, the voice of reason, the American gangster, Chael P. Sonnen. And the P stands for icon, in his own words, not mine. Colby Covington has embraced that style in more ways than one. I think he's the closest thing to Chael Sonnen since Chael Sonnen, and I love it. I love it because I get so sick of talking about the same fighters over and over and over again. The Conor McGregors, the John Joneses, the Nate Diaz. We need some new blood. We need some new people to talk about, whether we like them or whether we don't. We need some new people to talk about. Colby Covington is one of those guys. Furthermore, it's no secret, I'm not going to put my full political beliefs out on the line here, but I do support the president. I did vote for the president. There was no way, no how that I would vote for Hillary Clinton. And I just wasn't going to do it for a lot of reasons, and I'm not going to go into that. But the fact that Colby Covington wants to be what I see as a true champion in this country and bring that belt to the White House, I think stands for something. The fact that the Eagles are not going to the White House, the fact that the Warriors have not gone to the White House, and the fact that the Cavs are not going to go to the White House had they won that finals, or we're not going to, I should say, had they not won that finals, I think is a little disrespectful to the country. And I do feel that as champions of a league in America, if you really want to voice your opinion, if you really want to face the issue, going to the White House and talking to the president about some of the things that are bothering you, maybe things that he said or maybe policies of his, that's what gets things done in this country, rather than saying, oh, I don't want to go, I don't want to see him, I don't agree with the presidency, the current presidency, the current administration, I don't accept it. I get that. That's fine. That's your right as an American citizen to say that you don't like the current president. You can say that, or you can say that you support him. That's what makes this country the land of the free and the home of the brave. But the best way to fix something is to approach it rather than to shy away from it. And this protest is what helps. Silent protest. It's not. We need to start getting out there, facing what is bothering us, and then things will change. That is what will change. Social issues, government issues, whatever you want to talk about, going out there and speaking on those issues is what changes things. And I think anybody that disagrees with the president, that disagrees with what he stands for, his policies, whatever it may be, you might just not like the American government. Face it. Rather than saying, well, this country's going down, the current president is an idiot. Face it. Face him. And Colby Covington, I think, is a supporter of the president, but I do think he's more of a supporter of the USA. He understands the sacrifices that men and women make for our freedoms. And yes, that does include freedom of speech or freedom of protest, in my opinion. And I do think he wants to meet him. I think he supports him, but he supports the country. He feels fortunate to be an American citizen, as do I. And that's why, social issues like these are so tough, because there's a fine line between the social issues and then trying to be the best American that you can be. And that's what Colby Covington's trying to do. His word choice obviously is something that is not that great, but that is part of his ability as a promoter to bring in more eyes to the UFC. And the fact that we could be talking about a UFC fighter meeting the president of the United States is massive for the sport. It's a monumental moment in the sport's history. People can laugh at it. People can say Colby's a jackass. They can say he's an idiot. You can say that Trump's a jackass and that Trump's an idiot, that he shouldn't be the president, and he's not my president. But just the fact that Colby Covington has the opportunity to meet the president of the United States with this win, with that UFC belt wrapped around his shoulder, is massive for the UFC. And it's obviously no secret that Dana White is a friend of Donald Trump, the UFC president, is a friend of the president of the United States, and that he will try to make that happen. It's great for the business of the UFC. And frankly, it is great for the country because we should have our champions in the White House, whether they agree with Trump or not. I don't understand why in this country, when someone disagrees with a politician or someone of power, they shy away from it. If I was an athlete, and let's just say Hillary Clinton was president, and I became a champion at whatever sport I was playing or competing in or representing, maybe they're just inviting me just as a fan, or sometimes that happened all throughout American history, even with musicians and stuff. I would shake Hillary's hand, say, Mrs. President, thank you for having me. And I'm going to use my platform right now to tell you what I don't think you are doing right with this country. And there is nothing wrong. That could be a really constructive conversation. Rather than shying away from it, why don't these athletes face it? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that they're wrong for having the opinions that they do. I'm saying that they should face the issue rather than run away from it. And it's cowardly for guys like Steve Kerr to just be in an interview, sitting on a chair with all this press around him, saying, our country's going to hell, our country's SHIT, our country's this, our country's that. Steve, why don't you stand up, literally and figuratively, off your chair and do something about it? Be a voice. Be somebody that people can look at outside of being a basketball coach. He hasn't done that at all. I don't care what anybody says. He hasn't done that at all. He hasn't gone to the White House and faced President Trump. And they should. Anyone that objects to the president should face him. That is what we need to do. That's our duty as American citizens. So that's as political as I'm ever going to get on this show. And I just wanted to say that first and foremost. Colby Covington going to the White House, I think it's awesome. I think it's much needed in our society today. And Covington defeating Rafael dos Anjos the way he did, allow myself to reintroduce Colby Covington as the biggest active name. You heard me right. The biggest active name in the sport of mixed martial arts today, bar none. Conor McGregor's not active. George St.Pierre is not active. Colby Covington now is the biggest MMA name in the sport. And Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington is now the biggest fight in mixed martial arts. You're welcome, Tyron. That's what Colby's saying right about now. You're welcome, Tyron. Because nobody and their grandma wanted to pay to watch Tyron Woodley fight with the snooze fest that he was putting on, as Colby Covington calls them, Tyquil rather than NyQuil. His fights were boring. The performances, I thought the draw at UFC 205 was warranted, but I did think Wonderboy won that, but I thought that was okay. But the rematch, I did not think Tyron Woodley won that fight, and I told Wonderboy Thompson that when I met him in person. I told him that specifically, that was not a win for Tyron Woodley. You should be the welterweight champ. I said those words to him specifically. I felt like I was pushing the envelope a little bit in our conversation, but he accepted it and said, "Thank you, buddy. You know, I appreciate the support." And I said, "No problem, man. You're the dude, man. Keep doing what you're doing." And then he fights Darren Till, and that fight was such a joke in terms of the way that fight was judged. The judging in MMA, I can't say it enough, is getting so bad that it is crippling the sport. I'd be afraid to be a professional mixed martial artist. I'd be afraid not to get punched in the face, not to get choked unconscious, not to have a limb get broken, all the health risks. I'd be afraid of risking all those taking place. You're risking everything by going in there. And if you actually feel as if you win a fight, but it goes the full 15 minutes or the full 25 minutes, you have three, and I'm going to say this, dumbasses judging these fights. It's wasting the sport away. It's withering the sport away. And even for a judge to say 48-47, 48-47 for Colby, I thought, okay, that's fine. But realistically, I had RDA winning one round of that fight. Me personally, one round. I'm going to start putting scorecards out as the fights take place. Just something I did in years past, but I've drifted away from it just due to being busy with everything else with this show. So congrats to Colby Covington. I'm happy that this guy is staying true to his gimmick. I hope it continues. I want it to continue. I enjoy it as a fan, and I'm going to enjoy watching Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington. Whether I'm much of a T. Wood fan or not remains to be seen. Take care.